History of Columbiana County and Representative Citizens, written in 1905 by William McCord. Chapter 10. The Earth's Hidden Treasures. Salt, Coal, Oil, and Gas. History of Columbiana County, the Pioneers in Oil. In 1860, oil was discovered at Smith's Ferry in Beaver County, Pennsylvania, just east of the Ohio and Pennsylvania state line. Within a few years, the excitement extended to the southern townships of Columbiana County, and Pittsburgh capitalists invaded the vicinity of East Liverpool and drilled a number of wells. They struck nothing better than natural gas, and that product being considered useless, the wells were abandoned. Claiborne Sims sunk a well in the west end of East Liverpool, near Jethro, about 1860, and struck gas and salt water. For a time, gas was used as fuel in extracting the salt, and the well yielded 8 to 10 barrels of salt daily for years. Meantime, the oil fever had struck St. Clair Township. In May 1865, George Hamilton drilled a well on his farm near Fredericktown, but the oil obtained was of a heavy quality, such as was used years afterward as fuel oil, and the production being small, the well was abandoned. In 1866, J.M. Hart drilled the second well in the township, but that also showed a small yield. The Glasgow Oil Company invaded the township in the same year. The farmers went oil mad, and it was expected that the county would develop a tremendous petroleum field. At least 15 wells were put down in the vicinity of Fredericktown and Calcutta in 1866, and during the years succeeding, the production of the township reached 100 barrels a day. For 10 years, the Glasgow Oil Company pumped from 6 to 10 wells in that neighborhood, but the production gradually decreased. The oil operators even invaded Madison Township in the vicinity of West Point, and their wells were sunk in 1865 by Pittsburgh men who had organized the Long Run Oil Company, one of the drills going to the depth of 800 feet. A company of West Point farmers organized in 1877 and drilled a hole 1,000 feet in depth, striking again the heavy gravity oil and abandoning the venture. During these years, many of the enterprising farmers in the southern part of the county lost heavily in oil ventures. Gas was frequently struck, but the gas wells were abandoned as useless. In later years, frequent attempts were made to find oil in paying quantities on Yellow Creek, near Salineville, in the vicinity of East Liverpool, and also in several localities in St. Clair Township. But while there was some show of gas and here and there traces of oil, neither was secured in paying quantities. During the later 1880s and the first few years of the 1890s, when West Virginia had become an oil-producing state, East Liverpool became the center for the shipment of machinery and tools. The C.A. Smith Drilling Company and other oil men had their headquarters there, and supplies were shipped in large quantities into the new field. About this time, also, attempts were made to find oil about Salineville. Traces of oil and gas had been found there by the early salt well drillers, and in the coal seams later developed by the rapidly growing mining interests. Between 1880 and 1895, John T. Dessart and others drilled several wells, but neither oil nor gas developed in quantities to justify extended operations. The Wellsville Oil Field. Oil had been found prior to 1870 in the vicinity of Little Yellow Creek, to the north of Wellsville, but never in paying quantities. One Truesdale drilled 5 wells on the creek bottom, 2 of which yielded from 3 to 5 barrels a day for a short while, and then they were abandoned and the wells were filled up. However, from one of these old wells, the oil continued to force itself to the surface and make its way to the creek. People would now and then scoop it up and use it for lubricating purposes. In the fall of 1899, Lawson Brothers sunk several wells on the Ridinger place near the site of the old Truesdale wells and got oil in good quantities. The third well struck started off with a production of 150 barrels a day. But neither did this one nor any of the others hold up to anything like what was expected of them for any considerable length of time. The largest well, struck in 1899, while in 1905 dropped down to about 5 barrels. An explosion at one of these wells in September 1899 fatally burned 2 workmen, while John Rail, who was superintending the drilling, with several others, was seriously burned. A number of wells were drilled that same year on the hill south of the creek by Alex B. Smith, some of which for a time proved to be paying pumpers. But the oil in the field proved to be a pocket deposit, the limits of which did not exceed perhaps 20 to 30 acres, and was soon practically exhausted. Nevertheless, the interest in the field in 1905 again somewhat revived on the striking of a 10-barrel well by Rail and Amp Lewis on the Ridinger place, the Homeworth oil field. Following the excitement caused by the discovery of petroleum at Oil City, Pennsylvania, in 1858-60, a number of the substantial citizens of Knox Township organized a company to do some wildcatting after the new product near home. Early in the 1860s, Jacob Yagi and others put down the first oil well in Knox Township, near the Mile Branch Schoolhouse, toward the center of the township. The well was a small producer, and for some reason was never operated, the company disbanding. In the succeeding 30 years, many attempts were made to interest capital in the field around Homeworth, but without success until the discovery of oil around CO, Harrison County, revived the oil excitement throughout the eastern end of the state. In 1898, William Peacock of Massillon, while putting down a number of test holes in the vicinity of the old well of 30 years before, found green petroleum oozing from the ground and pronounced the prospect excellent. A company was at once projected at Homeworth, but before the organization was complete, Jonas King had succeeded in interesting the Renner and Dibel Oil Company of Akron and Youngstown. Within the next 5 years, this company drilled in more than 50 producing wells north and northeast of Homeworth. In January 1900, the Winger and Bly Oil Company of Warren, Pennsylvania, drilled in 2 large gas wells east of Homeworth, and indications were found of a large oil pool east and southeast of the village. In the hope of getting sufficient gas to run its extensive works at Alliance, the Morgan Engineering Company of that city purchased the wells and leases of the Warren Company and put down many wells, the gas from which they piped to Alliance. One of these wells, drilled on the farm owned by the Brook heirs, proved a fine oil producer. Oil excitement was now high, and experienced oil operators invaded the county. The Morgan Company sold its holdings to Upham and Amp, Walker of Parkersburg, West Virginia, who drilled a number of wells on the brook and neighboring farms and then sold out to A.L. Johnson, the present owner. Johnson bought of Pennsylvania parties more leases on the D.W. Thomas farm until in 1905 he had more than 30 producing wells. H.L. Thompson drilled 3 wells on the S.D. Sanner farm and then sold to Mr. Sanner, who had drilled 10 wells on his own land. The Weaver Oil Company of Youngstown also drilled what proved a paying gasser on the Hefner farm, adjoining the village of Homeworth, and from this well gas was speedily obtained for lighting and heating in the village. Later, the Lutz Oil Company of Pittsburgh began operations to the north of Homeworth, and in the summer of 1904 struck a 60-barrel well on the Teeter's farm. Wells were put down in rapid succession during 1904 on the Teeters and Barber farms, and during the excitement of that year, a line fence fight resulted in the drilling of 6 wells on less than an acre of ground, all of them large producers. The Lutz Company by 1905 was one of the largest producers in the field. The oil production of the field in 1905 was not less than 7,500 barrels a month, and 12 drilling machines were then at work sinking new wells. The oil was pumped to Homeworth and then loaded for shipment by rail to the National Refining Company of Cleveland. Salem's natural gas supply. In 1903, H. Highland began prospecting for oil and gas in Salem and Fairfield townships, and several good wells were struck, particularly in Salem Township to the south of Leetonia. In the summer of 1904, the Highland leases had been taken over by the Natural Gas Company of West Virginia, and by the fall of that year the gas had been piped, first into Leetonia and later into Salem, the company having secured as many as 10 strong producing wells. The gas was utilized by the smaller manufacturing concerns and for domestic purposes, fuel and light. August 22, 1904, the first pipes were laid in Leetonia, and by October 1st, the mains had reached Salem. Before midwinter, 7 miles of mains had been laid in the streets of Salem, and many private and business houses had been connected up, together with several of the manufacturing concerns on the flats. During 1905, the production continued so strong that not more than 2 of the wells had been drawn upon for supply at any one time. The gas was secured at a depth of about 900 feet. A new pipeline was laid to Columbiana in the summer of 1905. George Yard was president and G.F. Batchelor, secretary and treasurer of the company, with headquarters in Pittsburgh. Early in 1902, gas had been found in good quantities on the Fink Farm, and an effort was made to secure franchises for piping it into Salem and Lisbon. Meanwhile, the Columbiana Gas Company was organized, and by September 1st, 1902, the pipes were laid into Lisbon. The company in 1905 had 7 producing wells in Center and Franklin townships. At many places in the county, other than those already mentioned, are found producing gas wells that owe their existence to the search made for oil. On the farm of J.M. Felger, located on Section 2, Fairfield Township, is a gas well that has produced steadily since 1903 with a rock pressure of 225 pounds. In November of that year, Master Felger leased the oil right to McCormick and Company of Economy, Pennsylvania, who found an abundant supply of gas, but no oil. Master Felger later bought out the company and now utilizes the gas in heating and lighting his 9-room house. The supply is so large that he intends forming a company to pipe and sell the gas to the people of the district. In 1905, nearly every important point in the county was therefore reached by the natural gas, and the artificial gas companies established 30 or 40 years before in Wellsville, Salem, East Liverpool, and New Lisbon had given way to the fuel from the earth. Ohio in 1902 stood 3rd in population in the Union, 2nd in mineral products, 3rd in agricultural, and 5th in manufacturing. And in all of these, Columbiana County had played the part of a pioneer during the early days. The state of Ohio up to 1902, according to the government census report issued in that year, had produced 24.4% of all the petroleum produced in the United States since the beginning of the petroleum production.